morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Monday, September 29th, following a thrilling Ohio State victory over the Washington Huskies from the past weekend. I am joined by our senior producer at 11 Warriors, Chase Brown. Chase, how was your weekend? How are you doing today?
It was pretty good. A weekend full of college football is always great, especially with how many great games we had. I felt like USC and Illinois delivered. Ohio State Washington was obviously the game we care about the most around here, but then Georgia and Alabama was a great game, and I thought Oregon and Penn State, those two late games were definitely as advertised, and I feel like everybody was probably able to sit down on their couch for the whole weekend and watch some football. So that's always a great weekend.
Yeah, I can't believe that James Franklin underperformed in a game against a ranked opponent again.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
Who could have possibly seen this coming? But before we get into too many of the details of the weekend in college football, specifically the Ohio State Washington game, we do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, the sponsor of the 11 Dubcast and the official bank of 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Now, Chase, I had a bit of an interesting experience with this game because I went to an alumni event to watch it. I usually go to more of them, but because I've been kind of tied up with work-related stuff, even some tied to 11 Warriors, I didn't actually get to go to one until the fourth game of the season this year. On my way out of my building, I ran into three Washington fans, and I was wearing my Ted Ginn jersey. That's also a Dwayne Haskins and CJ Stroud jersey that I wear on the Thursday show or the Friday show for previewing the games every week. So they're wearing Washington hats, and they're like, "Oh." They were pretty confident. They were like, "Oh, look who it is." I mean, they were pretty confident they were going to beat us. I was very respectful.
Yeah.
I did not tell them that I had a public prediction out there published online that I thought we were going to win 42-17, which was a little bit loftier than what most of the people, including yourself, thought this game was going to play out as. That being said, only one person at the site didn't expect Ohio State to cover the spread of 8.5 or 9 points, depending on what book you were looking at going into this one. So it was the last time I went to one of these alumni events was the Michigan game. And you can imagine the vibes for that were not great based on how the game unfolded.
Understandable.
So you can only imagine how the first half of this game was, or at least the first quarter, I think more specifically. So yeah, game starts and it was pretty. I think looking at this game overall, you could probably if you're an optimist or a pessimist, there's things that you can really zero in and focus on that can kind of confirm your stance about where this team is at relative to defending national championship expectations. The first quarter, there's a lot of stuff that happened that, given this team was coming out of a bye week, you don't feel great about. Turning the ball over on downs in the red zone, first possession of the game, same thing that happened against Ohio the previous week, or the previous game rather. You would think that coming out of a bye week, executing in those situations and those short yardage situations would be a point of emphasis, as would ball security or more generally special teams. And that fumble Brandon Inniss had on that punt return shortly after Ohio State got its second stop of the game, that was a bit of a tilting moment for me. I was not too thrilled with Mr. Inniss, and neither were any of the Ohio State fans that I was in attendance with. It was not encouraging. It was disappointing too that, given Washington was missing one of their key starting cornerback, that it didn't feel like that they were going out of their way enough to get the ball to the receivers in the first half, that they were coaching conservatively, kind of the same way that they did after they turned the ball over on downs in the beginning of that Ohio game before they kind of opened it up in the second half. Obviously, things look much different in the second half. They've historically, under Ryan Day and for a long time now, they've done a really good job making second half adjustments and implementing those and executing. And obviously they were able to pull away. And regardless of what you may think about the offense or the special teams, the defense continues to be almost inarguably the best in college football this season. they haven't given up a single touchdown in the first half through 4 games of the season so far. I mean, that given that they've played Texas and Washington is a team pretty generally recognized as a top 40 opponents. A lot of people would have argued they should have been ranked ahead of this game. I think that's pretty impressive. So I'm curious. You seem like a pretty positive person, so I can imagine what your spin on this is going to be, at least more positive than myself. That being said, I am wondering what were your takeaways from the overall result of this game, given how it unfolded? Were they generally more positive, or are you more dialed in on what you think the concerns are for this team going forward relative to what their long-term goals are?
Yeah, it's a good question because I feel a little bit in between. I guess how should I feel about Ohio State, as you're mentioning, coming off of a 2-week break after the Ohio game, and they come into this Washington game in the first 15 plays, which is the number that coaches typically will say are scripted coming into a game, right? You have about 10 to 15 plays that you feel good about going out onto the field and executing those well against your opponent based on what you've seen of them on film, what you think about their personnel. And in Ohio State's first 15 plays, they turn the ball over, they punt, and they only gain 60 yards of total offense. And then it seemed like Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, I will give them credit, they adjusted their game plan from that point forward. But it was interesting to me that that wasn't just the game plan all along. It seemed like those first 15 plays were conservative. It seems like they didn't want Julian Sand to be put in a position where he could have turned the ball over. Turns out Brandon Inniss does that job for him by fumbling on a punt. But then once they really allowed Julian Sand to get comfortable in the offense, those next 4 drives. Let me just rattle off the plays, the yards, and the result of those drives. They go late in the second quarter. They go 10 plays, 73 yards. They take 3:31 off the clock. They get a touchdown. Then they come out at the start of the third quarter. They go 14 plays, 75 yards, 7 minutes and 41 seconds, touchdown. Next drive, they have 11 plays, 59 yards, 5.5 minutes, come off the clock, ends in a field goal. Then they go 8 plays, 44 yards, almost 4 minutes, and a touchdown. And you can see the difference between those drives and the 2 that started the game for Ohio State. And I think it simply was they trusted Julian Sand a little bit more to get the ball in the hands of the playmakers. On those drives that came around halftime, Julian Sand targeted Jeremiah Smith somewhere between 6 to 8 times. And they really made an emphasis to get the ball into his hands. He also got the ball in the hands of Carnell Tate, Brandon Inniss a few times, Max Clare. And so I really think you're just waiting to see whether or not Ryan Day will go into a game like this and fully trust Julian Sand from the jump. They talked a lot about after the game the confidence that this defense gives the offense. Trust that your defense is the best in college football. Trust that it's even historically good. They've given up 22 points through the first 4 games. They've only given up 6 points in the red zone, and those were the 6 points that Washington scored on Saturday. So this defense is historically good through 4 games. And I think I would like to see the offense have a little bit more, maybe just consistency, efficiency, some just look more smooth coming out of the game and being a little bit more efficient in that regard. So that's kind of where I'm feeling with it. It did seem like they were a little choppy at the beginning, and I would just like to see them get off to a faster start in a game that you wanted to take the environment out of it. You wanted to take Washington's fans out of it. So I just don't know necessarily if I was all that happy about the way it started, but as the game progressed, I definitely saw what they could do and the potential and the capabilities of the team.
One thing that we talked about privately as a staff a little bit after the game is that and this is something that I've spoken about previously on this show, relative to last season, is that it seems like that there is a trend with Ryan Day during the regular season in terms of not showing his entire hand, of kind of this is going to sound worse than how I actually mean to it to come out, but really watering down the game plan, so to speak, when there's an acknowledgement that the opponent is not one of the elite level of competition that they're really going to have to worry about of like postseason caliber. The trend, the one that I pointed to last season in terms of an example of that was Will Howard came in branded as this dual threat quarterback, this guy that was much more effective as a rusher than a thrower during his time at Kansas State. Obviously, he proved with a few tweaks to his mechanics under Ryan Day last year, he becomes one of the most efficient passers by single season standards in Ohio State history. But until the national championship game, the guy only runs the ball more than 10 times in 2 games. One of them is against Penn State, but he hardly ever uses his legs as much as he used to when they're playing lower level opponents. Then they get to the national championship, and it's very clear from the get go that Howard has the green light to take off and scramble whenever the opportunity presents itself. And he finishes the game with 16 carries. So it seems like that when they're not playing a team that they recognize as on their level, Day kind of goes out of his way to not unleash the full potential of the offense unless absolutely necessary, where they need to adjust and give out a little bit more, usually for the purpose of what I imagine is not putting tendencies on tape that the opponent can plan for in advance, and then using that when the opportunity presents itself when they haven't previously demonstrated it against other opponents. So, to what you brought up about kind of trusting Julian Sand to just kind of let it rip, I'm wondering what your overall thought on that is. If you think that that really is kind of a tendency with Ryan Day at this point, season over season, and are you concerned at all about how that might affect their ability to win games on the remainder of their schedule? Or given the result of last season, are you confident that this is the right approach that can work with Ohio State, even with this new group of personnel relative to the one last season that won the title?
I think, gosh, you're asking me some good questions today, George. I gotta be honest. Because this one is also it's a one that I can answer in two ways. I want to see Ohio State come out and start fast and put points on the board because that's fun to watch, right? That's what most fans want. They want to see Ohio State dominate at week to week, but then you also have to keep in the back of your mind that long-term picture of this was a team last year that really didn't hit its stride offensively until the college football playoff, until they came out and they just took Tennessee to the woodshed. They come out and the next week they're up 34-0 on Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Then they go on, obviously, and they beat Texas in a more challenging game. Then also they had some success against Notre Dame too early. But I do think that there is some truth to this of you need to be able to develop your quarterback, your first time starting quarterback, in a way that he is going to become more comfortable and he's going to become somebody that they can rely on as the season progresses. I will say when I look at Ohio State's schedule from this point forward, I don't really have any concerns outside of the game on November 29th against Michigan. I think the way that Indiana was able to dismantle Illinois, particularly getting after the quarterback against Illinois, I feel very confident in Ohio State's ability to go to Champaign and have success, especially with the way Caden Curry and Caden McDonald have been playing. And then also against Penn State, I don't know if James Franklin is ever going to beat an opponent ranked higher than him, or at least on the
I
same
love it
level
took one
again.
overtime loss at home for you to just totally dismiss Big James games. I'm all for it.
It just feels like it's been a building narrative for many years, right? If it wasn't going to happen with a whiteout at night in front of 110,000 people, it's exactly what Penn State fans have been asking for all this time. You're able to kind of build this idea in your head, right? Oh, like maybe we have the whiteout, but it's at noon, so it's not as effective. This was peak effectiveness for a whiteout, a peak environment, and they couldn't get the job done against Oregon. I don't really think they're going to be able to come on the road to Ohio Stadium and get the job done. So that's how I feel right now. And that's how I would say my mindset is changing about the way Ohio State might be bringing along Julian Sand, is that they would be able to trust their defense in the rest of their games going up into the most important game on their schedule and be able to put Julian Sand in positions that he can be successful as well. He's obviously had a tremendous amount of success to this point in his tenure, completing almost 80% of his passes, leading college football on that standpoint. Just get the ball to your playmakers and let them have fun in open space. Jeremiah Smith remains the best player in college football. Carnell Tate would be a wide receiver one at pretty much every other program across the country. And then they have plenty of other weapons at their disposal. So I think that's kind of where their mindset is as well, is they know that they have the talent. If you can win with elementary stuff and basic stuff, then you might as well do it. And maybe when you actually need to unleash this offense, then you have the capability to do it against opponents that might be in matchup games.
Yep. Well, I would say I agree with that. So it'll be interesting to see how conservative the game plan is coming out of this as they return home to Columbus to play Minnesota next Saturday, October 4th. Minnesota is 3-1, but to be honest, I mean, I would still kind of estimate that they're on the shallower side of the Big Ten at this stage. Looking at a quick rundown of their schedule, they obviously had a very close game with Rutgers last week, and prior to that, there haven't been a ton of big standout games on their schedule. So I wouldn't necessarily expect them to let it rip against the Golden Gophers. I do think it'll be interesting to see how much more aggressive they are against Illinois, given they had a good bounce back win against USC last week, but I do think that given I think this is one of the rare years where I think the Penn State game is a little bit juicier than the Michigan game, in spite of the fact that Ohio State hasn't beaten them for a handful of years, just
Yeah,
because
I
of the
agree.
storyline around Knowles. So I would think that if there's a regular season game where they're really gonna kind of show their stuff a little bit more than they usually do, it'll probably be in November. But I do feel pretty good coming out of this game about where this team is at going into the next phase of the schedule for October. As I alluded to at the top of the show, there's still things that they are going to need to work on. Special teams execution's obviously going to need to be better in close games. But
Can I
there's
say
still,
one thing
yes,
to the point you just made? 'Cause I think you sent the tweet to me at Jim Knowles, his performance against Oregon, and that it resulted yet again in zero forced turnovers and zero sacks.
second time in
For
their
that,
last three games against
exactly right.
Oregon.
I know Jim Knowles has a great understanding of Ohio State's personnel. But if they are not able to generate pressure on Julian Zan and he has a clean pocket all afternoon on November 1st, I'm saying afternoon because I'm assuming it's going to be a big noon game. I'm sorry if that's breaking news to anybody. If they allow Julian Zan to pick apart that defense all afternoon, I don't think that Penn State really stands a chance. Because if you can't pressure him, and that means that you're devoting talent to probably double, maybe even bracket cover Jeremiah Smith, I would expect Carnell Tate, Max Clear, Brandon Ennis, those guys to have a field day against Penn State. Dante Moore looked really great last night, or Saturday night. And I think Julian Sand could have a similar performance against Penn State if they're not going to get after him in the same way they didn't get after Moore.
Yeah, and I mean this offensive line has been we expected them to be a strong point of this team given how much talent was returning, but I think they've only given up 2 sacks at this point through 4 games of the schedule. So it'll be interesting to see against a team in Penn State that is kind of known as being an institution at this point for its players in the front seven. If they're not able to consistently get pressure on Sand by that point, I would think Ohio State's outlook for that game probably looks pretty good. But that's a month away, and I'm sure we're gonna have plenty of time to get excited and amped up for that game as the weeks draw closer to that one game at a time. Best thing about 4-0 is the chance to go 5-0, and that'll happen this week against Minnesota, and this weekend in Columbus. We will be having 11 Dubgate this weekend, so if you are in Columbus, make sure to go check that out. There will be all sorts of your favorite Ohio State and 11 Warriors personalities there gearing up for the night game against Minnesota. So we highly recommend you go out. Until then, thank you very much for tuning into the 11th Dubcast, and thank you to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. We will be back to preview the film study for this week with Kyle Jones tomorrow morning on the next episode of the Dubcast coming out of the Ohio State Washington game. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel to get that as soon as it drops on Thursday. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care, folks.